hiding in our thoughts, the practical look of that can be everything from just consumed by the racing, overwhelming thoughts I think that many of us notice in our mind. It might look like something that I think on the surface we feel is beneficial, right? Where we're engaging in self-awareness, self-analysis, right? We're kind of doing that type of thinking. A lot of us are lost in our thoughts or hiding in our thoughts, even trying to solve current issues, problems, stresses, right? Kind of going over an issue or something that's bothering us over and over again to determine maybe the course of action. Some of us do that with past experiences that we can't change. Some of us do that in worry of future experiences. We almost rehearse possible scenarios that might be related to an upcoming experience, event, or interaction, and then imagine all of the different outcomes of that. So just giving some practical examples of, I think, the different ways that we hide in our thoughts. And at the same time, I want us all to understand, if you're resonating with any of the different ways that we hide in our minds, if you will, I view that kind of practice of being in our minds not as something that's problematic, wrong, at all. I believe that that begins for all of us as a very adaptive way that, again, driven by our nervous system, many of us have learned as an appropriate mechanism to deal with our stressful or upsetting emotions. So simply what I'm meaning is when our bodies, the human nervous system perceives a stressful or upsetting, a dysregulating moment, universally, outside of our awareness, we're always sensing the safety and the security of our current environment. If anything pings that it's possibly a threat or we're at risk of physical or emotional, harm or suffering, our nervous system will initiate a sequence of reactions. And they're the same for all of us across the world. And right, the first thing that we will do is we will try to fight, I think is common language, maybe some people have heard of. We will try to overpower, overcome the threat at hand. Similar to fight, another viable option in that moment is to flee, right? This might be language I'm sure that some listeners have heard, the fight or flight response. And when we flee, right, what we're doing is we're removing ourselves, whether it's physically leaving the room, ending the conversation, or psychologically, we're fleeing, right? We're not now paying attention to the stressful or upsetting experience at hand necessarily, or the stressful, upsetting physiology or emotional reaction in my body. I've fled, if you will, to the thoughts in my mind. And so I really want to emphasize how adaptive that is, because when we didn't have that safe and secure, attuned caregiver who showed up in those moments of dysregulation or of upset to help our nervous system co-regulate, or really simply go from stressed or upset back into peace and calm, which over time then taught us the ability, those moments of co-regulation, consistent moments of co-regulation, will then over time translate into our ability to self-regulate. And when we didn't have that for whatever reason, because our caregivers were physically absent, maybe as was the case with me, our caregivers were physically present, but emotionally, they didn't have the resources themselves to be attuned to us in those moments of upset. So though emotionally, they were distracted, absent in whatever way, then a lot of us will kind of go down that sequence and land on the safest place for us to be when there's an upset in my body, in my physiology, is into my mind, is into the safety of my thoughts. The caveat, though, here, and the interesting point of this, we become almost a self-fulfilling machine where the stress and overwhelm in our body and all the sensations that go along with that in that moment, right? Because my nervous system got activated. I'm perceiving a threat or a stress at hand. So my body is now sending my mind all of these signals that there's a stress or an upset. Unfortunately, then in those moments, and this is why the nature of our racing thoughts are usually not pleasant. This is why then we begin to think stressful, upsetting thoughts, because our mind is trying to make sense of why our body is on edge, is feeling threatened, is feeling tense, why our breathing is constricted. And so the narratives that then it will produce, well, it must be because there's something stressful or upsetting that has now happened. So if our escape, right, is into the safety of our thoughts, and our thoughts are only continuing to be stressful or upsetting, then before we know it, that self-confirming machine, paying more attention to our thoughts, thinking we're keeping ourselves safe from the upset in our bodies, is only going to keep sending those messages then of stress right back down to our bodies. And then we stay stuck quite literally where we can't get out of the safety of our mind.